In the last couple of episodes, we talked about layers. Having the ability to make all your edits onto its own layer gives you the freedom of going back and changing your editing decisions at a later date. Now, this is fantastic. But today, we're going to do even more. Gain even more control with adjustment layers. Lesson 9, adjustment layers, coming up. Hi, I'm Terry Vanderheiden, professional photographer, and I'm teaching you Photoshop from the very beginning. We're on episode 9, and today we're going to be working with adjustment layers. When I first open an image, it's usually inside a Lightroom Classic. I adjust the exposure and the contrast and color before ever considering even bringing it into Photoshop. This episode on adjustment layers may help you think another way about those basic changes. So let me show you what I mean. So we're in Lightroom here. I know it's a Photoshop class, but we're in Lightroom here. And you can see I have an image up, a little underexposed. So we come over to our basic panel and we can brighten it up a little bit. We can alter the color, adding a little bit more warmth into it and get it to the point where we like it. And this is great. And let's go on and we do whatever kind of other editing we want to do to it. But let's go ahead and reset this and bring this into Photoshop. So we have the same image brought up in Photoshop. And if we wanted to make adjustments to it, the way we would do it, or one of the ways we would do it, is go up to Image, Adjustments, and then we have all these decisions that we can make on our adjustments. So let's just go to the simple one, Levels. This is going to control how bright or dark the image is. So let's go ahead and bring this over to slide this over to the light area, and you can see that we've lightened up the image pretty well. Let's go ahead and reset that. Do that one more time. Now the shortcut to the levels is Command L, and that'll bring that little dialog box up for us if we wanted to make our adjustments. So we can slide this over. Now there's a lot to this panel, which we're not going to get into today, but what we are going to get into is some of the differences of making adjustments here in Photoshop. So we'll click OK, and then we're going to do another adjustment. We'll come in here and go to, let's go to color balance, and let's warm this up a little bit. So as you can see in color balance here, you have the ability to control the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights all separately, which is pretty cool. Let's just go in the midtones, and we can bring up the red a little bit in the midtones, add a little bit of yellow. Maybe in the highlights, we add a little bit of yellow, and maybe in the shadows, we just add a little bit of red. And so we can control how this whole thing is done. We click OK, and now that's all done. Now, let's say, for instance, we wanted to go back and we said, let's go back and make some changes on this. I think I got it a little too red. Well, there's no way to do it. There's no way to go back other than just undo what you were doing and then start over. In our layers palette, which we learned about the last time, down here is this little half circle with it's half white and half black. And we click on this. This gives us adjustment layers. So watch what we can do. Let's go to Levels, and we have a very similar, when Properties comes up, we have a very similar guide to what we had just had, and we can make those same controls. So let's go ahead and slide that over, lighten that up quite a bit, and then let's make another adjustment layer, and we'll go into Color Balance, and you'll see that Properties window changes to the color balance. And now we can go over and add a little bit of red. And again, we have control over the highlights or the midtones, whichever we want. So we can control whatever it is we want in changing the color of this. So let's go ahead and move this out of the way for now. So we've controlled everything we want. But if you notice over here, what's happened is Photoshop, we'll open this back up so we see, Photoshop has a little icon here for color balance, and then a little icon here for levels. So we can go back into these and make changes on them. And you can see that it also added this white block right over to the side. So what this white block is, this is a layer mask. And we'll get into layer masks on our next episode really deeply. But this is kind of an entry port into layer mask, which layer mask to me, I think is the third most important thing in Photoshop, where if you were to say selections is the most important, next is layers, and those are kind of half and half. Layer masks are really what sets Photoshop apart. And what's really nice on an adjustment layer, when you click on a new adjustment layer of anything that you wanted, let's say you wanted to do curves, for instance, it gives you a layer mask as well, which is really great because it gives you much more control when you have a layer mask. So let's go ahead and delete this one. So let's in fact turn this one off. This is our color balance one. We're going to just look at our levels on this layer mask, and you can see we've got levels here. So whenever you click on the icon, it'll bring up this properties box. And then over here is the mask. So right now, mask is all white. What that means is whatever is white, you'll be able to see through it down to the next layer. So almost like a piece of transparent film. So these effects will go through to all of these, whatever's below this layer. So as we go through this, let's go ahead and do a little test. We'll grab our paintbrush and we'll paint in black. We'll look down here and we see that we're going to paint in black. We got a soft round brush, 100% opacity. And let's go ahead and make our brush a little bit bigger, and we'll just brush across this area. So if we look at this, what's happening is that the black is opening a hole. It's opening a hole into the bottom, the layer below it. So you can see through this, and now you're getting just this layer being visible. Everything else that's white is on our adjustment. So if we turn this off, we'll see this is normal, and then we can see that we've lightened this area up here. So all of this area around here is all what we would normally consider when we're working on this levels adjustment layer. So let's go ahead and revert that back to white. And let's do this again. Let's do our gradient tool. We'll just do a standard gradient. We'll go from black to transparent, and let's go ahead and drag this over here. So now you can see, let's do that one more time. We're just going to drag this gradient over. And you can see what we've done is we've created a black to white gradient. So on the white, this area here is all of these parameters we put in for our levels, and then everything that's black is revealing what's underneath. So this mask is a real simple way to work inside of Photoshop and have the ability to make really exact changes. So let's get rid of this for now. Go up to our color. Let's go ahead and make this super extreme. So let's add a whole bunch of red and a whole bunch of yellow so we can see this real clearly. So now what we're going to do is use our layer mask to reveal these original tones. So we'll just take paint in black, and we're going to cut that hole, if you will, with our paint and paint everything back the way it was. So now you can see that this effect that we did up here, this color effect, was just in the area that we wanted to have it painted in. So this allows us to create a mask and control just an area that we want. So in this case here, this is all white, and that's going to reveal whatever we put in this adjustment layer. Whenever you're working inside of Photoshop, and instead of making an adjustment by going to image and creating adjustment that's basically locked in, don't do it that way. Come over here and make your adjustments with adjustment layers. Let me show you another one. So let's go ahead, and first thing we're going to do, we'll make a copy of our background layer. We don't have to. And as we get more into Photoshop, you're going to see you're going to have a less of a need to make a copy of your background, because we're going to be working in layers, and all those layers will then have their own work on them, and those will be completely controllable. So let's say, for instance, we wanted to control the color on this fox. So let's go up and, well, instead of going up to image and adjustments, we're going to come down here, make our adjustment layer, and we're going to go hue and saturation. So let's go to hue and saturation. We see that we have the ability to create all the saturation that we'd like. So let's go ahead and bring up the saturation. We can take and just saturate just the reds. And we can see that, of course, it created our layer mask for us, which is what we wanted. But as we look at this, we say, well, you know, I don't want the eyes to be red, just the fur. So how do we do that? We take our brush and we're going to paint in black, because we're going to reveal that original layer down below. So let's come in here and we just paint in black, and you see a little dot comes up here. And we'll do the same here. And we certainly don't want any additional red or saturation on the nose, and probably don't need any saturation on the whites of his face. We don't need it inside the ears. So again, we're just using our paintbrush to cut holes in this mask, or to paint holes in this mask, so that we're not getting extra saturation in areas that we don't need it. So the earth in the background, we don't need that to be saturated. Certainly don't need that little green bush to be saturated. Up here. So now you can see what we've done. Looking at our layer mask here, you can kind of see where you might have messed up too. You can look over here, although it's not going to be showing because it's so dark. Come all the way to the edges. And let's bring this down just a little bit, make sure we get all the edges that we want. And now we have just, we'll turn this off and on. You see we've just saturated the reds in the coat of this fox. So let's do another enhancement, and we're going to go over to our adjustment layer, and we're going to do color balance, and we're going to add yellow. Let's add yellow in the midtones. Let's add yellow in the highlights, and let's add yellow into the shadows. Terrible looking image right now. But let's go ahead and take this, and we're going to invert this. And we invert it by, we can do it a couple of different ways. We can fill it with black, which would be edit, fill, and then choose our color, black, and fill it. Or we can go invert, which is Command I. That's a shortcut for inverting a mask. And now what we're going to do is just paint in yellow. So let's go ahead and do this. And we'll take our brush, and we're going to just paint in white. Got to make sure that we're painting in white. So we hit the X key, and that'll flip those two colors. That's a really good shortcut you're going to want to learn, is the X key. The X is going to flip those colors. D brings those colors back to default. So let's go ahead and paint with white. And now we're just painting in that yellow layer that we added. Let's pull back and see what this looks like. So a little extreme, but you know from the last episode, we have the ability on our opacity to change the opacity of any layer. So let's go ahead and slide this back a little bit. And now we can bring in a little bit more yellow. But let's take it another step further. Let's go in here and get tighter on this. Obviously, if we were trying to enhance the yellow in these eyes, we wouldn't do it over the pupils. So let's go ahead and get our brush. And instead of painting in white, we're going to now paint in black. So let's change that color, make our brush quite a bit smaller. And let's just paint out the pupils. So now that's starting to look a little more realistic in terms of enhancing just the yellow in the eyes. So this is what we started with. And this is what we're finishing with. More extreme reds. And what's nice about this is, since it's on layers, we can always go back and say, well, okay, that's a little too much saturation of the red, and that yellow is a little too much. And let's say we didn't even want yellow. Maybe we wanted more green and less yellow in those eyes. and we take it to every level that we want, take out the yellow in the eyes, and we can do whatever it is that we want to do. And we haven't changed anything. All we've done is just change our properties inside of Photoshop, and now we can change the total color of the eyes if we want. And that's because we're on these layer masks, and the layer masks allow us work within whatever adjustment we made. So we have lots of adjustment layers that we have the ability to work with. So let's go through and take a look at a couple more. I'm going to get rid of these. And let's add a new adjustment layer. And we can add a solid color for instance. Let's go ahead and add red. Now, obviously, that's pretty extreme, right? What are we going to do with that? Well, we could take the opacity down, and then we could go back in and say, okay, let's fill this with black. And the way we do that is we know we can just invert it, fill it with black. And now when we paint in white, we're painting in white. Now we're just going to paint on the red into wherever it is that we wanted to add the red. So let's say this is the area that we want to add this red to. Now we can change our opacity and bring it back, So there's just a little hint of red. Now we're at 14, 10%. Turn this off and on. See what we've added. We've added a little bit of red to his fur. And that's with a full-on mask of red. And we just started with red and then built our way backwards. And again, if we wanted to change this, we double click on it and we could change that to blue if we wanted. And that's going to add more blue to his fur. Not that you want to do that. Let's get rid of that. Let's check out a levels. So we'll go in here and we'll do levels. We did this before, but let's go ahead and lighten up an area. And that's going to be probably way too light. Let's go ahead and lighten it just a little bit more. So it lightened up this area. So if we turn this off, we can see we've lightened up the whole thing. So let's go into our mask. Let's convert this completely to black. So we're going to click on it and do Command I. Now we're going to take our brush and paint in white. And we're just going to paint in the area that we want to lighten up. If that's more than we want, we have two ways to fix it. We can come up here, change our levels, because it all goes back to where it was before, and we can slide this back, make it a little less extreme, or we can just simply go to opacity and bring the opacity down on our correction and lighten it that way. And you can see we've lightened it up off and on. So you can see as we make adjustments, so no longer is there a reason to make adjustments by going up to image, clicking adjustments and making those permanent adjustments. You can always put them onto a layer now. So there really is, in the workflow, you'll always want to go to the layer, the adjustment layer. So we'll click on this, and for instance, if we wanted to do a curves, click on curves, and then we can put in whatever curves we wanted, and then we'll create more contrast, color, whatever it is that you want to do on this. And you've got your own layer up here. And if it's all white, it's going to show everything that is inside of your adjustments. If it's all black, it's not going to show anything. So if you want to bring some of it back, you can just grab your paintbrush. And remember, in masking, you're not painting in any color other than white and black. And of course, you can paint in gray. So let's say, for instance, we're going to paint at a 50% opacity. We'll move our opacity of our paintbrush down to 50. And now when we paint, we're going to be painting in gray. So as we do that, we'll see here, let's move this over. Let's go ahead and paint. You can see that all that contrast that's built up in that curves layer is just in the ear. And you can see by the layer mask, if you look closely, that's all gray because we just painted in gray. Let's say, for instance, we want to paint in just a little bit of, we just want to paint a tiny bit. So we can come in here and paint with the 20% brush. And you'll see here when we look at the mask closely, it's even a lighter or a slightly darker gray because it's, again, we have white up here. This is 20% of white. So by changing the opacity, we're telling Photoshop that we want to paint in 20% of whatever our front color is. Our foreground color is white, so we're just painting in just a little bit of white, 20% of white. So you can see as we go through this, this could be used for dodging and burning, perfect dodging and burning. Let's go ahead and open up another image. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. And let's say we want to brighten up those eyes. We come into our adjustment layer, and we're going to go to, I find probably the easiest way to do this is to do an overall. So we'll click on this, brings up our, even though everything else is fine, we just want to lighten up the eyes. Let's see what happens. We're going to lighten up the eyes that way. We're done with that. So obviously it's extreme. So we're going to come in here. We're going to make that into black. Command I, invert it. Let's zoom in on our eyes. And let's take our brush. Make it a smaller brush. Let's make sure we're going at 100%. And now let's go ahead and paint in some highlights inside of the iris. So now let's turn that off and on. We've added a little bit of light and depth to those eyes. Let's do one more. Do another adjustment layer, and we're just going to use a solid color. And this solid color we're going to make as white. Click OK. And what do we do over here? We want to invert this. Command I, Control I. And now what we're going to do is paint in white again. And let's just paint a highlight. We're just going to click and add a little highlight. Now, if that highlight's too much, we can come over here and change our opacity. Let's take a look at before and after. We've just enhanced the eyes. Let's say, for instance, we want to do a little bit of dodging and burning. Come over here, go to levels, and we're going to darken this thing. Let's go ahead and darken it. Good. Again, we're going to invert it because we're only going to be working on parts of it. And that's usually the reason I invert it. It's going to be what's going to be most of the painting we're going to do. We're only going to do a little bit of painting, so let's invert it. And so we're just going to paint in white. Let's go ahead and darken in here. Darken around. Any of these lines here, we're going to just darken a little bit. Darken as spots. So all on the tip of a brush, we have all the ability that we had inside of our levels. We can just control however it is we want and just paint. And let's take a look at what our contrast did. So we added contrast in that face. It's a little extreme, so let's go ahead and bring the opacity down a little bit. And let's say we want to make his nose a little bit. Let's say we want to make his nose a little more colorful. So we'll go in here and we'll do hue and saturation. And let's take a look. We can easily just bump up the saturation. There we go. Now it looks like the whole cat is saturated, which it is because this layer is white, right? So let's go ahead and invert that. And we're going to take our brush. We're going to paint in white on this black box because we want to reveal more of what our adjustment is. There we go. We could probably enhance his eyes a little bit by adding a little bit of color to it. That's just adding the saturation of what we started with. So this is a saturation level, right? So we can reduce this, change the opacity down just a little bit so it's not quite so extreme. And now as we look at this animal, we went from basic, which is fine, but this is a little more enhancement and can really brighten up the face and bring more attention to whatever your subject is. Another simple way is to make a vignette. Let's go in here. We'll go to levels, and we're going to darken this whole thing down. Darken it. Darken it. This is the contrast level here. We'll get into levels another time. And let's go ahead and take our brush. Nice big brush. Make sure we're painting in black this time. So we hit the X key. And now we've created a vignette. So everything else, you turn this off and on. And you can see right here, all of the effects that we did from our levels is what's showing through on the white, and then it gradates down into black where there's no effect. So that's a simple way that you can go from start to finish with just using adjustment layers. So adjustment layers is a great tool to work with inside of Photoshop to do any of your adjustments and then have total control to get back to them. So inside of Photoshop, we have the ability to put all of the adjustments on its own layer. We can always come back to them. We can turn them off if we want to just see what we're working with. We can control it in all the different ways that we want to make any kind of adjustments as we go. And we can add to it and create the image that we want from having these adjustments. And what's nice is when you save an image in Photoshop and then open it up again, all of these layers will be intact. So if you wanted to come back, if let's say you printed this image, and you said, wow, those eyes look a little too bright, they're a little too extreme. Well, pretty simple. You can come back in here into the actual image itself and say, okay, what is the layer we want to work on? Okay, we like the color of the eyes. You know, I think those highlights are a little too bright. So we just come right over to the color fill layer and then slide the opacity back a little bit to a point where you like what it's added, and then you can go back and print it and make it sure it looks good. So depending on how you're going to ultimately use your images, this might be something that you're going to share on social media. So you're going to save it, look at it on the screen about the size it'll be on social media and say, okay, does that hold up? Yeah, it does. Okay, so that way, if you wanted to go back to it, you can. You can go back to it and create new work with your adjustment layers. Remember, the adjustment layers are down here, this little half moon. You click on it and you can pick any of the adjustments that you'd like to pick and work with as you go through. And I encourage you to fool around with these, see what you think. There are lots of things that you can work with. It's a lot of fun. Now, if you have any questions about some of the topics I've covered, feel free to leave the questions or comments below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Remember, you can always reach me via email, terry@imagelight.com, if you'd rather contact me that way. So next time, we're going to take a look at layer masks, and we're really going to get into this. It's really cool. You're going to love it. You're not going to want to miss it. Now, if you just stumbled across this video, I appreciate you watching, but this is a part of a class that takes a beginner that's never worked with Photoshop, and they can work their way through and learn Photoshop from the very beginning. So all of these classes are in order, and this is class number 9. So if you want to go back and start at the beginning, go to my channel and look up playlists, and you'll be able to see right there that we have our beginning Photoshop classes all in order. Now, if you have any questions about some of the topics I've covered, feel free to leave the questions or comments below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Remember, you can always reach me via email at terry@imagelight.com if you'd rather contact me that way. Next time, we're going to take a deep dive into layer masks. We touched on them a little bit today because the adjustment layers come with a layer mask, but you're not going to want to miss that because there's a whole lot of information about layer masks that's really cool. See you next time.